This is a response video to MiggetyMike1, who did a response video to my video on Judith Jarvis Thomson's Violinist argument on abortion. So first off, let me say thanks, Mike, for the reply video. I appreciate the civil and respectful and thoughtful argument that you made. As you can imagine, I'm not exactly persuaded by your objections, but let's go through them one at a time to see why it is I don't find them persuasive. I've identified 4 objections in your video, and all 4 of them are attempts to say there's a disanalogy between a violinist and a woman seeking an abortion. My general strategy is going to be to look at the alleged disanalogy and either tweak the original thought experiment to accommodate the disanalogy, or deny that the disanalogy is in fact a morally relevant disanalogy. So let's start with the first objection. Let's call this one the responsibility objection. You point out that the Society for Music Lovers kidnaps the violinist, and that actually kidnaps you and hooks you up to the violinist. And I think I actually want to quote you directly here because it's kind of revealing your language. So this is a direct quote. You're referring here to what happens when you are kidnapped by the Society of Music Lovers. You say, "You had no responsibilities. You're completely innocent. So obviously this only applies to abortion in the instance of rape." I think what I really want to focus on most is the language, "you're completely innocent." What's implicit in that statement is that a woman who has consensual sex is somehow guilty. Simply because a woman chooses willfully and freely to have sex, it does not follow that she is consented to allow another person to use her body against her will. And if you don't believe that, let's go back and quickly just change the original objection, the original thought experiment. Let's say that instead of just minding your own business when you're kidnapped by the Society of Music Lovers, let's say that you go to the opera, and you've read news reports that say, well, people at this opera recently have been kidnapped and hooked up to famous musicians who have had kidney ailments. So you know there's a possibility that if you go to this opera, you might end up getting hooked up. You choose to go anyway, and sure enough, you're kidnapped and hooked up. So you're not really completely innocent. It's not the case that you had no responsibilities. You were aware of the future possibility that you might be caught and hooked up. Are you now obliged to stay hooked up to the violinist? I don't think so. Another person is using your body against your will. The fact that you could have done something to prevent it, or that you did something that in some way was part of a causal chain that led you to being put in that position, is irrelevant. All that matters is that never, at any point, did you give consent to allow another person to use their body. In this respect, all unwanted pregnancies are akin to rape, because all of them involve another person using your body against your will. Second disanalogy objection you give is we might call it the bedridden objection. You point out, and I gotta say this, rightfully point out, that pregnancy does not make you bedridden in the way being hooked up to the violinist does. So you're right, this is a disanalogy, but is it a morally relevant disanalogy? Is it really going to affect the outcome of our moral judgments in this circumstance? Again, let's change the thought experiment slightly. Let's say instead of a full-grown man, this violinist is a dwarf, a really small dwarf, and we can hook the dwarf and the connection machine up to you through a harness, and you can carry that dwarf around pretty much like a pregnant woman carries around a fetus. Now, is this going to change our judgment? Are we really going to say, well, because you were bedridden before, it was okay to unhook yourself from the violinist then, but now that you can get up and walk around and go to the grocery store and things like that, it's really not as much of a burden on you, so now you can't unhook yourself from the violinist? I don't think so. You're right, it is less of a burden if you can do this, but I don't think that burden is really making the difference here. So it's a small marginal problem that you're bringing up when you're bringing up the bedridden objection. All right, your third objection. We might call this the killing, letting die objection. The killing, letting die distinction is a huge topic in moral philosophy. It comes up, for example, in the context of euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide quite a lot. Objection, you say that, well, if I unhook myself from the violinist, I'm simply letting the violinist die. Whereas when you have an abortion, you're actually taking affirmative measures to kill the fetus. You say, hack him up with an axe, but that actually, that sort of procedure applies to a very small percentage of actual abortions too. The vast majority of abortions, I can't remember the figures off the top of my head, but it's in the ballpark of about 80%, are chemical abortions. They involve taking pills and having the young fertilized egg flushed out rather than any kind of surgical procedure. That's only about roughly 20% of abortions in the United States. To make it more analogous to a chemical abortion, maybe I just have to take a pill, and that pill will get into my bloodstream, but I can process it, but it gets into his bloodstream and it kills the violinist. That's another way to make it more analogous. But I think the better way to make it more analogous is to do the following. That we just simply change the way we perform abortions. We go in and we don't harm the fetus directly. We simply remove it from the womb. We cut the umbilical cord, and then we let it sit there in a bed and die by just exposure. It's now more analogous to the violinist case. We're not killing it, we're simply letting it die. Is this more morally permissible? Is this really going to make anyone say, well, it would have been wrong if you were cutting it up, but since you're simply letting it die, now that's okay? I don't think anyone's going to say that. So again, while there is a moral issue here, I don't think it's going to tip the balance. I don't think it's really going to make a profound difference in the overall moral debate. Lastly, your fourth objection, the maternal relationship objection. You point out, and again, rightfully so, that the violinist is a complete stranger, and unlike the fetus, which is biologically related to the woman. And this biological relationship, you say, has some sort of important normative or moral force. And you point to certain intuitive cases where, yeah, it seems like we do have special obligations to our children that we don't have to strangers. But I think, once you explore it further, again, you're going to see this really can't possibly make the difference. We can go back and change the violinist case. Let's say that you're hooked up to the violinist, and then you're about to unhook yourself, and all of a sudden the doctors burst in and say, "Wait! We just found out this is your long lost son. You have a biological relationship. Has your moral responsibilities changed? Do you say, no, oh gosh, well now I can't unplug myself. I wasn't obliged to stay hooked up when they were a total stranger, but when it turns out that they're my biological child, now suddenly I do have an obligation." I suppose you could pursue that, but that seems to me like in the very least you need to make a strong argument for that case. Also, you can think about a case, I have posted another video on hard cases for the extreme pro-life, and in that video I brought up a recent actual case that happened, where a woman at a fertility clinic had some other woman's eggs implanted into her. So she did not have a biological relationship with the child that was inside of her. Now, do you really want to say that normally abortions are not permissible because of the biological relationship, but in this special case, in this one case, because there is no biological relationship, that woman can have an abortion? That to me doesn't seem like a plausible position. Either abortion is wrong in all these cases, or it's wrong in neither. The fact that there's a biological relationship between the child and the mother by itself is not enough to say that abortion is going to be impermissible, or that there is a significant moral difference between the violinist and the case of a woman choosing to have an abortion. Okay, I hope that touches on all the substantive objections that you bring up. Again, I thank you for your video response, and I hope you found this charitable, thought-provoking, and worthwhile. Take care, Mike.